Have you noticed it? The empty pews, the closed churches, the sermons streaming to smaller and smaller crowds. Something big is happening, quietly. Organized religion, once the heartbeat of civilization, is fading in real time, not with an explosion, but with a whisper. For thousands of years, belief shaped every corner of human life. It told us what was true, what was right, and what would happen after we die. But today, those certainties are cracking. Every generation is walking away faster than the one before, and no one, not priests, not imams, not rabbis, can stop it. But here's the twist most people miss. This isn't just about fewer people going to church. It's about a complete collapse of the system that once defined meaning, morality, and authority. The pillars that held religion upright, fear, obedience, and exclusivity, no longer work in a connected, skeptical world. The numbers prove it. Across continents, belief is dropping to record lows. In some nations, more people now identify as nothing than as any religion at all. The rituals are still there, weddings, funerals, holidays, but the faith behind them is hollow. It's as if humanity is keeping the shell after the spirit is gone. So the question isn't if religion will collapse, it's how it's collapsing, and what replaces it once it's gone. Because something is rising to take its place. A new kind of meaning, a new way of belonging. And it's happening faster than anyone expected. Let's look closer at the quiet unraveling of one of the most powerful institutions in human history. The numbers don't lie. Across the world, faith is shrinking faster than ever before, not by persecution, not by war, but by quiet indifference. What used to be passed down automatically from parent to child is now being questioned or dropped entirely. In the United States, nearly 1 in 3 adults now say they have no religious affiliation at all. In Europe, that number climbs even higher. Countries that once sent missionaries across oceans now struggle to fill their own pews. It's not just statistics. It's a generational fault line. Boomers were mostly believers. Gen X began to drift. Millennials left faster. And Gen Z? They're rewriting the script altogether. For many young people, religion feels like an artifact, something from their grandparents' world, not theirs. But here's the crucial point. People aren't replacing belief with rebellion. They're replacing it with curiosity. They're asking better questions. They're demanding evidence. They're realizing that morality, community, and meaning can exist without supernatural authority. For centuries, religion claimed ownership of all three. Now, the data shows otherwise. Sociologists once predicted that as societies modernized, faith would decline. For a while, that theory seemed arrogant, too confident. Yet now, it's happening in real time. Even in countries where religion is still strong, Latin America, Africa, parts of Asia, the trend is shifting towards skepticism among the young and educated. So what's driving this? Access. The internet has done more for secularization than any philosophy ever could. A teenager with Wi-Fi has access to more perspectives than entire civilizations once did. When anyone can fact-check holy claims in seconds, authority crumbles. The numbers don't lie, they tell a story of evolution. Humanity isn't losing faith out of hatred or arrogance. It's simply growing out of needing it. And yet, as the faithful shrink in number, something else is breaking too. The very monopoly religion once held over knowledge, morality, and belonging. That's where we're headed next. The monopoly is broken. For most of history, religion wasn't just a belief system, it was the system. It controlled the flow of knowledge, dictated morality, and decided who belonged. Priests were the teachers, scripture was the textbook, and the church was the internet before the internet existed. If you wanted truth, you went through them. If you wanted forgiveness, you paid them. If you wanted purpose, you obeyed them. But that monopoly is gone. Science took knowledge out of the temples and put it into labs. Ethics evolved beyond stone tablets and became a living, breathing conversation shaped by empathy and human rights. And community? It's no longer confined to who sits beside you in a pew. It's global, digital, and diverse. You can find belonging in online groups, movements, and ideas that have nothing to do with God's. The shift is irreversible. Religion once thrived by controlling information. But today, anyone can open a browser and read every sacred text, every critique, every contradiction. The gatekeepers lost the gates. Knowledge is democratized, and when people can learn for themselves, belief has to compete. Morality, too, has outgrown divine command. We no longer need threats of eternal punishment to know that kindness, honesty, and compassion matter. Secular ethics have proven that we can build justice systems, human rights laws, and social progress without invoking heaven or hell. And as for community, people now form tribes around shared interests, not shared creeds. From science forums to mental health spaces to creative collectives, people connect more deeply through authenticity than through ritual. Religion's power came from scarcity. It had the answers when no one else did. But now, there are better answers, faster, fairer, and backed by reason. The monopoly is broken. And once power is lost, institutions don't surrender gracefully. In the next chapter, you'll see how scandal, corruption, and hypocrisy began to expose religion's cracks from the inside. The scandal effect. For centuries, organized religion sold itself as the moral compass of humanity, the voice of purity, the guardian of virtue, the one institution you could trust even when everything else failed. But what happens when the self-proclaimed source of morality becomes the one most in need of forgiveness? Every scandal doesn't just wound religion, it shatters the illusion of divine integrity. The child abuse cover-ups. The financial empires built on donations meant for the poor. The televangelists preaching humility from mansions. Each revelation chips away at the last thing religion had left: credibility. These aren't isolated incidents or a few bad apples. They're patterns, repeated across continents and denominations, showing how deeply the rot runs. When an institution built on confession refuses to confess, people notice. And when the defenders of morality hide behind excuses, the faithful begin to ask the question that's hardest to silence. If this is what holiness looks like, what's the difference between church and corruption? Religion's power was never just about belief. It was about trust. People gave money, time, and loyalty because they believed those at the top were guided by something higher. But when headlines show cover-ups instead of compassion, the spell breaks. Every generation that sees hypocrisy exposed walks away faster, not out of rebellion, but out of clarity. Because once you see the contradiction between what's preached and what's practiced, you can't unsee it. So the question isn't whether these scandals damage faith, it's whether faith can survive them at all. What happens when moral authority loses its own morals? You get collapse from within. And that's exactly where this story is heading next. Fear no longer works. For most of human history, fear was religion's greatest weapon. Fear of sin, fear of judgment, fear of hell. It kept people obedient long before they could even read the scriptures used to frighten them. If you disobeyed, eternal torture awaited. If you questioned, you risked damnation. Fear built empires. But fear loses power when people understand what they're afraid of. We now know death isn't punishment, it's biology. The mind isn't a battlefield for demons. It's chemistry, neurons, and trauma that can be treated, not exercised. What used to be labeled sin is often just human nature, emotions, or instincts misunderstood by people who didn't have science yet. Psychology replaced confessionals, medicine replaced miracles, and slowly, people realized that hell wasn't a destination, it was a story used to keep them quiet. Religion thrived in the unknown. When no one understood lightning, disease, or death, the idea of divine punishment made sense. But as knowledge filled those gaps, the gods of fear had nowhere left to hide. The devil didn't disappear, he just stopped being necessary. Fear only controls when you believe the threat is real, and now, fewer people do. The more we learn about the brain, the body, and the cosmos, the less room there is for invisible punishments. And that's what terrifies the institutions that built their power on keeping people afraid. Because once you stop fearing hell, you stop needing heaven. So if fear no longer works, what happens to those who depended on it? The answer is simple: they start to lose control. And in the next chapter, you'll see how religion's global authority began to crumble the moment the world learned to think for itself. The digital exodus. The internet did what centuries of reformers couldn't. It broke religion's information monopoly overnight. For thousands of years, priests, imams, and pastors controlled the narrative. They decided which questions were allowed, which doubts were dangerous, and which books could be read. Then one day, the gates fell. Now, anyone with Wi-Fi can fact-check a sermon in real time. Anyone can compare creation myths across cultures, line up Bible contradictions side by side, or discover that their one true faith has hundreds of versions, each claiming exclusive truth. The moment that happened, blind faith had competition. The digital exodus isn't about rebellion. It's about curiosity finally being free. For the first time in history, believers could read their sacred texts without the filter of authority, and what they found often didn't survive scrutiny. Passages once hidden by translation or interpretation are now dissected on forums, podcasts, and YouTube debates. The result? Doubt spreads faster than any sermon ever did. Hypocrisy can't hide either. Scandals that once stayed buried in local parishes now go viral in hours. The illusion of moral infallibility collapses under the weight of screenshots, leaked videos, and receipts. The internet became religion's mirror, and it didn't like the reflection. But the biggest threat isn't exposure, it's options. People who once thought their community was the only path to meaning can now explore science, philosophy, meditation, or humanism with a few clicks. They don't have to leave faith in anger, they simply outgrow it. The institutions that ruled through silence are now drowning in noise, a global conversation they can't control. And here's the irony. Religion once promised salvation through revelation. The internet delivered it, just not the kind they expected. Next, we'll explore how this digital awakening isn't just changing faith, it's rewriting what it means to believe at all. The power reversal. There was a time when kings bowed before priests, when popes crowned emperors and prophets decided who ruled nations. Religion didn't just influence politics, it was politics. Laws, wars, and moral codes all flowed from the pulpit downward. But that balance of power has flipped. Today, religion no longer commands, it campaigns. The same institutions that once dictated policy now cling to it for relevance. You see it everywhere. Pastors endorsing candidates, clerics turning sermons into political speeches, churches turning into voting blocks. What was once sacred authority is now lobbying. This isn't divine influence, it's desperation dressed as righteousness. Because when the pews are empty and the youth are gone, power must be borrowed from somewhere. And politics offers the illusion of importance, a stage to remind the world, we still matter. But there's a problem. When faith ties itself to partisan power, it stops being universal. The moment religion becomes a political tool, it exposes what it always feared people would see, that it's human-made, shaped by interests, not revelation. It's not that religion disappeared from politics, it just changed roles. Once the master, now the follower. Once the crown giver, now the campaigner. And every alliance it forms chips away at its moral authority. Because how can something claim to be eternal when it shifts with every election cycle? In trying to stay relevant, religion has traded reverence for relevance, and lost both. But the collapse isn't just happening in parliament halls or pulpits. It's also happening in people's hearts, where old fears and obligations are being replaced with something far more dangerous to authority: freedom of choice. And that's what we'll explore next, what happens when belief becomes optional. The cultural drift. The churches are still standing, the bells still ring, the rituals still happen, but something's missing. The belief that once gave them meaning has quietly slipped away. Weddings are now photo shoots. Funerals are reflections of life, not gateways to eternity. Christmas is about family, food, and lights, not the birth of a savior. This is the cultural drift. The traditions remain, but the faith that built them has evaporated. People still crave connection, beauty, and meaning, but they no longer need religion to feel it. A ceremony doesn't need a priest to be sacred. A song doesn't need scripture to move the soul. This shift is subtle, but profound. For centuries, religion held a monopoly on emotion. Joy, grief, hope, all filtered through its language. But now, people are finding those same emotions in art, nature, love, and community. The human experience has outgrown the script. It's not rebellion, it's evolution. People didn't stop believing because they stopped caring, they stopped because the story stopped fitting. In a world where science explains the stars and empathy explains morality, faith feels like an echo from another age. But here's the twist. Religion's biggest loss isn't faith itself, it's relevance. When a wedding can be beautiful without a sermon, when a funeral can honor life without preaching about death, when a holiday can unite millions without invoking a god, the institution that once defined meaning becomes optional background noise. And once something becomes optional, it's only a matter of time before it becomes obsolete. So the question isn't if organized religion is collapsing. The question is, what replaces it when it's gone? Adapting to survive and failing. Walk into a modern church today, and you might not even realize it's a church. There's coffee brewing in the lobby, an indie band on stage, LED lights pulsing in rhythm, a vibe closer to a Spotify concert than Sunday service. The sermons are shorter, the hashtags longer. It's not faith they're selling anymore, it's belonging. This is the survival phase, religion rebranding itself as lifestyle. You don't have to believe, just attend. You don't need God, just good vibes and community. Churches now offer yoga sessions, relationship workshops, and self-help talks. The divine message replaced with motivational slogans like, "You were made for more." But here's the irony. When religion disguises itself as everything but religion, it admits its own defeat. The disguise works only because belief isn't the draw anymore. People come for the coffee, not the creed. When your sanctuary starts competing with Starbucks, it's not a revival, it's a rebrand. And yet, you can't blame them. The old model is crumbling. Fear no longer motivates, authority no longer convinces, and blind faith no longer sells. So churches pivot, trying to be modern, relatable, inclusive. But in doing so, they trade conviction for comfort, clarity for crowd appeal. The result? A hollowed-out faith that speaks softly so it won't offend, that entertains instead of enlightens. It keeps the rituals but loses the reason. Adapting should mean evolving, but this isn't evolution, it's camouflage, a way to survive in a world that's already moved on. Because once religion becomes indistinguishable from pop culture, it stops shaping society and starts following it. And the moment the sacred imitates the secular to stay relevant, the collapse isn't coming. It's already here. The rise of meaning without myths. For most of history, religion had a monopoly on meaning. If you wanted peace, you prayed. If you wanted purpose, you served. If you wanted awe, you looked up to the heavens and called it divine. But now, people are discovering all those same emotions, without the myths attached. Step into a meditation class, and you'll hear language that sounds spiritual, but isn't supernatural. Be present. Let go. Find stillness. That's mindfulness, ancient insight stripped of dogma. Visit a planetarium, and you'll see children looking up at galaxies with the same reverence once reserved for gods. That's awe, powered by science. Or talk to a humanist, and you'll hear something religion never dared to say: we create our own meaning. These new philosophies don't demand faith, they reward curiosity. You don't have to surrender your mind to feel wonder, you just have to open your eyes. The sacred has been replaced by the real, and for many, that's more fulfilling than any promise of heaven. Humanism, mindfulness, therapy, and secular rituals all answer the same needs religion once did: belonging, guidance, transcendence. But they do it without demanding belief in things that can't be proven. They invite questions instead of punishing them. The irony? Religion feared a world without God would be empty. But it turns out, it's fuller than ever. People still gather, still celebrate, still search for meaning. The only difference is, they no longer need a gatekeeper to access it. And that's what terrifies the old institutions most. Not that people stopped believing in God, but that they realized they don't need Him to live meaningful, moral, deeply connected lives. Because when meaning comes from within, control from above stops working. The irreversible shift. Once a society steps away from religion, it almost never turns back. History proves it. The moment people learn they can build morality without commandments, find wonder without worship, and live fully without fear, the spell breaks for good. Countries like Sweden, Japan, and the Czech Republic once filled cathedrals and temples. Now, belief is a minority hobby. Not because people became evil or lost purpose, but because they realized they didn't need religion to have either. And here's the key: no nation that's secularized has ever truly re-religionized. Once the illusion cracks, it doesn't get rebuilt. This is what makes the shift irreversible. Religion depends on habit, on repetition, on stories passed down before skepticism could interrupt. But when generations grow up without kneeling, without memorizing verses, the cycle ends. Faith can't regenerate without indoctrination. And that's why the decline feels slow but unstoppable. It's not collapse like a building falling overnight. It's erosion, constant and quiet. One generation questions. The next one forgets. The third one doesn't even notice what's gone. At first, institutions call it a crisis of faith, then a decline in attendance. Eventually, they stop pretending and start selling their buildings. And by then, it's not rebellion, it's evolution. Humanity outgrowing one of its oldest comfort systems. But here's the twist most people miss. What replaces religion isn't chaos or nihilism, it's maturity. It's a world where meaning is earned, not handed down. Where questions are sacred and certainty is suspect. Religion won't vanish completely. Its symbols will linger in language, holidays, and architecture. But the authority it once wielded, that era is over. Because once the mind learns to walk without a shepherd, it never crawls back to the flock. Religion isn't dying, it's transforming. What we're witnessing isn't destruction, but liberation. For centuries, belief dictated who we were allowed to be. It told us what was sacred, what was sinful, and even what questions we were permitted to ask. But now, for the first time in history, people are choosing for themselves. The collapse of organized religion doesn't mean the end of meaning. It means the end of monopoly. It's the moment humanity realizes that purpose, morality, and wonder were never owned by any institution. They've always belonged to us. And maybe that's what belief was really preparing us for all along. Not blind obedience, but independent thought. Not worship, but awareness. Not faith, but freedom. So no, religion isn't dying. It's evolving into something freer, more personal, and infinitely more honest. The cathedral isn't made of stone anymore. It's built in the mind of every person who dares to think, to question, and to see the world as it truly is. If you've ever questioned why belief still holds power, or what happens when we finally let it go, subscribe. Because the truth deserves to be spoken out loud, especially when it was once forbidden to say at all.